Athletes' meals, difference, and the construction of the real. Rarely is an object of praise in and of itself worth the trouble, with the exception, of course, of the gods and a tender mistress. La Fontaine adds the king for elementary reasons, and thus for him the fable is over before it starts. He has paid the king with this word, and he eats. How do you praise a champion? He is only what he is, once you have said that he won the race. You can speak of him only by evoking the gods, giants, heroes of the games. This is what Simonides the Elder does, just like some newspaper reporter. He spoke of Castor and Pollux. It was no hyperbole, that is to say, no exaggeration, but a parable. Note, parabole in the French means both parable and parabola. Translator. He throws himself aside, the fabulist says. He makes a distance, a difference, écart. We are indefinitely on the side, the proof of which is the fact that the word parole, speech, word, derives, I don't know how, from this parable, parabola. Between the word and the thing, a parasite makes one move aside. The parable was the divine word. Castor and Pollux always return. No, I cannot speak without a god or a mistress, who are always present in the distances of my words. No one ever totally speaks of the thing. It is written in serious books. A Philadelphia lawyer, Gascon, knows that, and a Greek even more so. Why are we always on the side? Let's see. I have never really understood all the fine points of the morality of lying, nor what is currently being said about the referent. You would have to speak only, and always, of algebra. Simonides spoke, parabolically, of twins, the Dioscuri. The praise was, as was necessary, outside the discourse. Professors also judge things to be outside the subject, a proof that they know better than I do where the line is drawn. Scissors and knives. Simonides thought that an example was necessary. You will more easily understand it if you know that his athlete was a wrestler, and that the gods of the fable were twins. Wrestlers are well aware of twin forces. My hand, your arm, my arm, our equilibrium. One of them will win if he throws himself to one side of this equilibrium, then the other one is pinned. Wrestling, twins who have braced themselves, then a distance at the end between the winner and the loser beneath him. A distance which in the end could be considered a parabola. Consequently, the wrestling match, the parable of the twins. And inevitably, Castor and Pollux enter the picture. This is the example, the poet says. And well he does. Again a double and a twin, bearing a difference. There is even one known language in which champion and example are the same word. Better yet, example is a word whose prefix says difference, and whose root says buying and selling. As if it were a way of getting out of exchange, something taken away, something removed from the purchase, like a distance from the equilibrium of the payment, like a parable of twins. The example elevates combats. La Fontaine says that Simonides said so. This elevation says the same thing again. Note, I like the example here, so close to praise, éloge. I ask you, says Socrates to the sophist, for some definitions. You give me praise and examples. Later on, Socrates says that he too sells them. We will never be able to finish measuring on the same scale all the words used in this calculation of glory. I am measuring the too much, trop, of the beginning of the fable. Simonides, however, sliced the thing up by speaking of the champion in 1/3 of the text and of the twins in the other parts. A trunk, a tail, and a head. A text in 3 parts is well balanced, they say. In the poem, at least, the athlete's adversary was missing, while each of the brothers had his own. The figures are exact. The double is split without deciding exactly. A text in 3 parts, a dialectic, has a forked tongue and the head of a viper. The twin thesis and antithesis divinely produce the athletic synthesis. The synthesis waits for its adversary or its double in the wrestling match. A good show, in truth, where mythology gives birth to dialectic. Simonides sells this triangle to the athlete who recognizes only one of its sides. The estimate and the contract promised a talent, but the champion takes care of only 1/3 of it. The gods, he says, have to pay for their publicity. The moral of this story is an exact reckoning, and quite clear. Here there's a difference relative to the estimate, relative to the balance sheet, relative to the balance of equilibrium. The series of differences begins again from parole, parable, parabola, to example, to wrestling. The debit balance takes these depreciations into account. I am still measuring the too much. The athlete calculates it, and the fable writes it down. But the story is not over even if the moral has already been told. We know that after business is over, there is a feast, like a supplement to the palavering about the combats and to the signatures of the treaties. It is the meal that is cut short, the interrupted banquet, that of the stone guest. Come dine with me, says the Hercules of the fairgrounds. It is not the thought that he owed something to Simonides, for the accounts have already been adjusted. But you have to say thank you, merci, gracias, and the like. Thank you is said when everything else is said, when there is nothing left to say about the treaties and the contracts. Thank you is also said when everything is written. Such speaking and giving outside writing. The thank you of gratitude and the free giving, khai. Simonides does not want to lose that in addition to what he owed and lost, for there is what is owed and what is freely given. They have 2 different kinds of logic and 2 different economies, and perhaps 2 ways of living as well. In the logic and economy of the law and of possession, exchange reigns, weighing and measuring, figuring out the balance. In the logic and economy of the freely given, exchange is not there. In one group, owing dominates. In another, the freely given. 2 incomparable societies. In the second, there are lots of communal meals, lots of invitations to feasts, repasts, banquets. I am thinking of a story barely indicated by the fable. Among modern men, here and now, be they poets or fighters, known or unknown, the freely given occurs only after the owing, the feast after the payment. Maybe they fear losing, besides what is owed them, the thanks of praise, freely given. Exchange first, the celebrations, if possible, later. Business before pleasure. For the gods, the situation is the inverse. The given comes before the owed. The twins appear, thanking the poet first, and then, in payment for his verse, warn him of an imminent danger. Exchange word for word, praise for warning. Thank you. We'll talk later of payment. This is certainly the world upside down. The world turns in one direction. History has its economy, where exchange is fundamental. It is called the meaning of history. It stops a moment, turns in the other direction, and in this new history, exchange appears after everything was freely given. It is not a new story. On the contrary, it is an ancient one, lost in the dark recesses of memory. It is the story of the gods. Now I understand why the gods were always eating and drinking. Now I understand why the meal was interrupted by the seesaw of history, by a catastrophe that I still do not really understand. The societies of giving have disappeared. Even in antiquity, they were thought to be divine. They have left a place for the collectives of giving and having. There are only barely perceptible traces of the history of giving in texts and on monuments. Since then, we have been caught up in economic history, a time of calculation of exchanges and of making up for losses. Does this history have an outside? That is precisely the subject of this book. I have not finished yet. When history and time are measured by the calculation of exchanges and brought back to this calculation, I fear that here and there will be some insolvents, people who can give nothing but their children, their muscles, their bodies, a pound of flesh. It is a time of death and a history of death. People who can give only their life and their bodies bit by bit. How many times have men sent up a cauldron filled with scattered limbs to the table of the gods? I can only give my approach to death. I can only pay with my courage in the face of this shadow. I can only write of its immediacy. This time and history are invaginated around nothingness. They need a zero to be calculated. There has to be a nothingness for their metaphysics. Now I understand why the gods seemed immortal to men. At least I think I know what ambrosia did not contain. Let's return to the banquet of men, always interrupted. So who are the gods? The ones whose meals are never interrupted. The immortal is the eternal reveler. Look at Simonides at the banquet. He eats and drinks as he pleases, quite in the position of a parasite. He stuffs himself and gets drunk for his freely given verse. He pays his select table companions and their good food in word. But someone disturbed the dinner. At the door of the room they heard a noise. Simonides runs off, but no one else follows him. No one of the cohort misses a bite. But the cohort is wrong, for its members are about to die. For the first time we know who knocks at the door, who makes a noise behind the doorframe. The gods, who warn us to move, for the sky is about to fall. The twins run off. Simonides follows them. They move to one side, parabolically. The word is made flesh. The difference becomes static. A pillar is missing, and it is cast aside. Everything is soon cast aside. The parole, parabola, parable, the example, the elegy, the ode, and the freely given. The poet and the gods, the column and the coping. We always calculate the too much and the parabola, parable, parasite. The parasite pays in parables. Here the list of differences, their order, title, or collection. A pillar is missing, and we pass from the logical to the material, from the word to the flesh, to stone, from the word to its referent. Who is avenged? The divine being, the poet, or the thing itself? You don't live in language and words for very long before the object comes back once, before a foot is suddenly missing, before the reel falls down on your head. I am thinking of a triangular room, with a ceiling with 3 architraves, ogies, bays. That is all predicted by the calculation of the static, by the word, the logical. Had the triclinium been square, a missing column would not necessarily have been an irreparable tragedy, for the cantilever could have resisted. But a column is missing, and the ceiling finds nothing to lean on. It had 3 beams, like the elegy, 3 feet, 3 supports, 3 theses, like the discourse. 2 for the twin gods, 1 for you, mortal, who one day, one night, one evening, will be missing. 2 stable columns, 1 unstable one. Triangle, the elementary link of static equilibrium, of the distribution of space, of the arrangement of positions, of topology, of measure, of the immobile arrangement of forces, of the syllogism, of reason. Material, logicial. Do away with one of the feet of the tripod, everything collapses. Cross out a thesis, a term, everything vanishes. Everything falls on the athlete's feet. The guests are crippled. A miracle is sought, and the miracle is just that the same distance is kept between small energies and large, and that the real world is thus comprehensible. that the parable of the parasite and the paralysis of the guest are quite precisely parallel. The next day, the athlete as well as the guests are cast aside lame. They are missing a pillar. They need walking sticks. Like the old man in the riddle of the Sphinx, like Hephaestus. Those who limp are the discoverers. Inclination is the beginning of the world. One can never praise enough. Here is the list of excess, fault, difference. It appears in the logic of reasoning, in calculation, in accounting. It appears in language, in words and in poems, in parables and paraphrase. It appears in order, plan, space. It appears in exchange and in money, in what is owed and what is freely given. Pay doubled once more, that of the poet and that of the gods, the cursed part. It appears at the edge of the beam, at the top of the threatening pillar, in the cantilever and the coping. It appears now in physical systems, in the difficult equilibrium between stone and marble. It appears in living systems, walking, running like the crippled fighting twins until one of the pillars of the struggle gives way and makes a winner a loser, paralytic in his body, and the elementary paradigm of the social group in combat. I count this impressive advance as a knowledgeable construction of the real, just like those the classical age often made. The prefix para is counted, calculated, weighed in its difference from equilibrium, but it is also placed and situated. When the column holds the beam up, one line goes to the end of the second. Here, the vertical joins the edge of the horizontal. That makes a right angle at the top. In any case, it makes an angle and a top. Move the pillar, mark a cantilever, a loss of difference, para. In the diagram, the line no longer goes to the end of the second line, but to another spot along the way. The parasite has a relation with the relation, and not with the station. And it puts the relation in the form of a cantilever. The simplest diagram appears. Static, in English. Parasite. In one word, and not only in one prefix, the whole text and the whole story. Then, and then only, can it be understood that it is an origin for the art of memory. The discourse, the course taken, parcours, is of canonical simplicity. It is deductive. It constructs reality. It constructs the real by starting with the difference. In a variety bestrewn with simple arrows, the difference is in the place of the inclination.